Good afternoon, everyone. I would really like to thank the scientific board, the organizational committee, our moderator, of course, for the hard work. And today I'm going to talk about our interesting topic that I think may be considered in line with all the things that we see all over these days and even today. And then the relationship between museums, cultural institutions, and some topics just like disability, inclusion, and training program. In order to do that, my presentation will be divided into three parts. The first part will be related to the education and inclusion in the definition of museum. So the main goal of the presentation is to try to understand if there is a balance between what a museum should be and should do in order to be considered that, so a real museum. The legal framework, education inclusion, the national legal framework. And then through a project that I'm going to explain in the next few minutes, we try to understand if, what are the services and performance of Campania museums as regard the training program, education, and the way they interact with the disabilities and people with special needs. So let's start from the museum definition and how, according to the definition of museums led by Econ in 2007 and 2022, and how the definitions of museums interact with the part related to education and inclusion. According to the definition 2007 in Vietnam, a museum is a no-profit permanent institution in the service of society and its development, open to the public, which acquires, conserves, researches, communicates, and exhibits the tangible and intangible heritage of humanity and its environment for the purposes of education, study, and enjoyment. So in the very last part of the definition, we have this connection, but it's a very small one when it comes to the definition of education in the area related to museums. While on the other hand, in the last definition of museums in Prague 2022, a museum is a not-for-profit permanent institution in the service of society that preserves, collects, conserves, interprets, and exhibits tangible and intangible heritage, and that's pretty the same the previous one, but open to the public, accessible, and inclusive. Museums foster diversity and sustainability. They operate and communicate ethically, professionally, and with the participation of communities, offering varied experiences for education, enjoyment, reflection, and knowledge sharing. So it's easy to understand how the definition of museum itself has changed all over the years, and how the last one is way more inclusive than the previous one, even when it comes to the part related to education and disability inclusion. So the second part, it's related to the how the legal framework in terms of standards and services for museums interact with the in Italy interact with the national museums. So what you're going to see right now, it's part related to the education and training program and disabilities according to the national law 113 of 2018. According to which, for example, a building, this is our minimum standard that should be mandatory for national museums, public and private, obviously. So, for example, the building intended for public use must comply with the regulation regarding the removal of architectural barriers, of course. It's easy to understand how there is a particular importance given to accessibility for disadvantaged categories, primarily for people with motor, sensory, or cognitive disabilities. Or for example, the preparation of specific perception protocols for people with disabilities to be progressively made mandatory. The national law from this specific point of view is divided into minimum standards and improvement objects. So the museums that are part of the national system need to have minimum standards and need to have some improvement goals that should be fulfilled in the next few years. So as minimum standard, for example, from this point of view, there's the access to structures and identification of a minimum route while there are improvement objectives, just like provision of alternative ways to enjoy the assets on site for people with disabilities, just like virtual tours or dedicated routes. The national legal framework deal even with the presence of a relationship with the territory and the stakeholders. In fact, it's mandatory for museums in Italy, or should be mandatory, to have information on the availability of assisted tools and activities aimed at people with disabilities, for example, or specific tools for people with sensory or cognitive disabilities. And as I told you before, when I was talking about stakeholders, there should be a development of offers aimed at people with disabilities, special needs, shared with associations, structures, schools, and operators, and the definition of agreements and initiatives with the stakeholders, including sector associations, regarding the offer of for people with disabilities. So this is just a panoramic overview regarding this specific topic related to what a museum should have in order to be considered a real museum. But the real goal right now is to try to understand if the museums, not only not specifically in Italy, but in the Campania region, have follow these specific guidelines. So it's what we are trying to do right now. In order to do that, I'm going to present briefly the Observatory of National Museums in Campania. That's a project led by Vanvitelli University. That's the university which I belong to, through which we try to analyze and monitor the museums and cultural institutions in Campania region. Thanks to our research, we analyzed more than 450 museums in 9 research fields that are the fields that I'm going to show you in the next few minutes. All the data we gain have been gained through questionnaires. So we have 130 questions in our questionnaire. And we gained more than 35,000 data with more than 20 people involved in 5 local districts, which is divided the Campania region. So this is just a panoramic overview on the project. These are our the research fields, and probably the last two are the one that we have more interest in. So we analyze the general info of the museums, just like analysis and an overview of the IT museums, tickets and affordability, public services, marketing and communication, the performance of the website, critical documentation, departments, and these very two parts that are really interesting for us right now. It's inclusion, services and performance, and laboratories. All the data we gained has been put in our GIS, that's the geolocalized map, that help us to have a panoramic overview on the location of museums in our territory and the evolution all over the years. So it's a tool, infographic tool that's really pretty useful when it comes to the study and research and the presentation and dissemination of our researches. So, as I told you before, this very first part was related to what a museum should be and what it needs to have when it comes to the national standards. So, what is interesting right now is to understand if there is really a balance between what a museum should have and what it really has. As I told you before, for example, when it comes to captions, that is the very first way through which museums interact with people and stakeholders. According to our data, 81% of museums have captions, but probably this is the single data, the single information that's positive from our researches. In fact, for example, when it comes to digital tools for training and education, that, as I told before, are mandatory according to the national guidelines, we did not find availability in 75% of the cases, while just 14% of museums have screen video, lean, touchscreen, or 3% video games and 3D tech that are the minimum tools in order to interact with people with disabilities, but even with people with no special needs. Moreover, digital analogic tools for inclusion, for example, the 75% of museums have no kind of digital analogic tools for inclusion, while just 21% yes. Or even worse, 80% of museums has no augmentative and alternative communication tools, while 12% yes. As you may remember, according to the national guidelines, it should be mandatory to have didactic laboratories and activity for people with special needs. Again, according to our data, 54% of museums has no didactic laboratories, while 44% have some kind of didactic laboratories. And even worse, it's part related to the laboratories specific for disabilities. And according to our data in Campania, the 80% of museums has no didactic laboratories for disabilities. Even when it comes to the part related to staff and people employed in museums and cultural institutions, according to our data, just 27% of monitoring museums have educational staff. As I told you before, we analyze the services and performance of 450 museums in the Campania region, but the questionnaires have been filled by just 230 museums. The other museums choose to not respond to questionnaire, or they are simply closed, so they are unable to fill in the questionnaire. And the data are even worse when it comes to specialized staff for disability. And so we have 76% of museums that have no people to interact with people with disabilities. And last but not least, we don't really know how museums may have an impact on the territory and our stakeholders. In fact, according to our data, the 57% of museums have no report impact analysis, and it's even worse when it comes to the report on educational activities. So we don't have data regarding the 63% of museums, while just 33% of museums have report educational activities, or 36% of museums have a report or impact analysis. So just to wrap it up, it's pretty clear that we have, from one end, a framework, a legal framework that's pretty clear regarding what a museum should have in order to have minimum standards. But on the other end, we have a situation that it's pretty bad in terms of services, in terms of performance. But I feel confident to say that it's not something that's related just on Campania region, but it's probably the 90% of museums in Italy are not able to follow the standards imposed by the government. So probably we may say that the standards imposed by the government and the guidelines imposed by the government in terms of museums are too high to follow, and that's why the data are so bad. But on the other hand, we have the data regarding to the specific museums, so we may say that we are definitely not in line on what government and the Ministry of Culture ask. And what we can do, probably we can help museums, and we do as Vanvitelli University, through training program for people employed in the activities of museums, or probably with project in order to support them with the activities with people and stakeholders. So I'm just going to conclude leaving my contacts, because as a PhD candidate for Vanvitelli University, it's always interesting to try to connect with other people and try to find a way to improve our quality research. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. So I'm thinking about all the